What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Rails of Mass. If you're just joining us, our adventure began right here, and we began following the former Bay Colony Railroad from Needham Junction all the way to Medfield Junction. Today we're back at Needham Junction, and we're going to continue in the opposite direction towards Needham Heights. So far in this series, we've covered just about 6 miles of track, and today we're going to do about another 1.5 miles. Now, before we can proceed to Needham Heights, we have an inbound on the way. We're gonna hold here on the side track and wait for it to pass before we continue on. With the inbound now clear, we're all set to leave Needham Junction. We're going to try to cover as much track as possible before the next train comes. From Needham Junction here, we're continuing north. This is Compass North, but it's also considered Railroad West. Also a bit different from previous episodes. This section of line is all continuous welded rail. It was installed here in 1986. If you're wondering about that black felt paper on the ground in front of us, that's for the flange oiler. It helps with the tight curve at Needham Junction. If you've been following along with this series, you know we've been doing this in 2 different time frames. We've been looking at things both as they are in modern day, and as they were around roughly 40 years ago. These days, the Needham line is controlled by an MBTA dispatcher. But back in the previous time period we've been looking at, it was controlled by the Bay Colony dispatcher. Although these days the PTC cables are mounted on utility poles, this will likely change in the near future, in favor of going underground for more protection from the New England weather. We're now approaching the Oak Street grade crossing. Every crossing between here and Needham Heights Station has grade crossing protection. Now, before we proceed across Oak Street, we are going to stop and take a look at the crossing from the side view. The crossing doesn't look all too different from when it was installed around 1986. But a new push for a quiet zone in Needham may change that in the near future. Up until about a decade ago, there were regular traffic signals integrated with the crossing. Those have since been removed. Continuing on our way, we're making our way towards Needham Center. There's just one more grade crossing between here and there. As we pass this tree on the right, we're now able to see Needham Town Hall in the background. The utility poles on the left are part of the PTC system, or positive train control. These were not here when Bay Colony was around. We now find ourselves approaching the next grade crossing at Great Plain Ave. Up until the early 1970s, the crossing gates at Great Plain Ave were manually activated. Around 1986, the entire Needham line was rebuilt, and pretty much everything you see today looks very similar to what it did back then. Now that we've arrived at Great Plain Ave, we're going to step over to the side and take a look at the crossing, both as it is and the way it was in 1986. Now what we have here is a picture from March of 1986. Amtrak is here with the welded rail train. This is the same welded rail that's still in place here today. We now find ourselves on the other side of the crossing, looking back towards Great Plain Ave. In front of us is automatic block signal number 126. It's integrated with the crossing here. Both this signal and the neighboring signal 127 are rumored to be in their last months of service, so I've been trying to take as many photos of them as possible. Now looking back to 1986, we see Bay Colony 1061 making its way to Newton. Now with the train past us, we're going to flip around in the other direction and get ready to follow it. But not without a look at something else first. If you look at the block building in front of us, that's the only remains of what was once a beautiful Needham Center station. If you don't know what you're looking for, you'd probably miss that. This wonderful picture is courtesy of the Needham Historical Center and Museum. And now that we've had a quick look at the station, we're going to continue on our way. There's a train currently making its way out from Boston, and we're trying to clear the next 2 grade crossings before it arrives. In modern times, we're now heading away from Boston, but at one time you could get a train in either direction to Boston. As we get a little bit closer to the May Street grade crossing, we're going to talk a little bit about the automatic block signals here. Both automatic block signal number 126 that we just passed, and 127 that we're approaching, are integrated with the crossings here. This allows the train to enter Needham Center Station as normal, and they can use a keypad to tone up the crossing to exit the station without blocking traffic. The high-level platform here was constructed around 1986. Needham Center and all stations on the Needham line are fully accessible, and have been since the line was reopened. The identification plates 126 and 127 on the signals are both mileposts. They indicate 12.6 and 12.7 miles from Boston. We now find ourselves west and clear of May Street. There's only 2 more crossings on today's adventure. This section of railroad is single-tracked, but at one time was double-tracked long ago. When I began making this series, I was originally unsure if I was going to cover this segment or not on active rail, but I thought it was important to cover this gap, so we can take a look at both the way it is and the way it was. Although I have covered most of this area in other videos, I've never done it at track level like this. I think that views like this are important, because it's something you can't see every day, unless you're an engineer. The building with the trucks on the right is the Sudbury Farm supermarket. The large building on the right is the Needham Free Public Library. We're now approaching the Rosemary Street grade crossing. We're going to be stopping here briefly to get off the track. There's a train coming behind us, and we gotta get out of the way. As the train gets ready to depart Needham Center, we're going to take a look back in time. Here we see the familiar face of Bay Colony Alco 1061. It's about to make its way to Medfield Junction after making a quick stop here at Rosemary Street. Looking in the foreground, we see a cable coiled up. This is going to be for the future grade crossing protection. "1061 is now traveling in the direction we just came from, back towards Needham Center and Needham Junction. Now coming back to December of 2025. That train that we just saw depart at Needham Center is about to arrive. Although we have a new library now, and we now have crossing gates, this spot is still very recognizable compared to about 40 years ago. With the train now in the clear, we're going to proceed across Rosemary Street and continue into the layover yard. We're now entering the area of Needham Heights. There's a 2-track layover yard here, which is meant to hold 4 train sets overnight. Unlike many other lines on the MBTA system, the layover yard here in Needham is not currently in use. These days, all Needham line trains either originate from Southampton Street Yard or Reedville. The only time I've seen this yard in use in the previous years has been when a train suffers a mechanical failure. For many years, the residents of Needham Heights fought to get the trains out of here. After many years of debate, it seems the residents have finally gotten their way. But you know everything's subject to change. The layover yard remains intact here, and I hope it will be put back in use one day in the future. Those 2 stand-like objects we're passing now are for 480-volt power for plugging in the train sets. Here we also see more of that black felt paper like at Needham Junction. This is the spot where the locomotive and the set would sit, just to pick up any oil or anything else that may leak off the engine. On the right we see the former Carter Shoe Factory. It's still standing today but is currently abandoned. It was most recently home to a nursing home, but has not seen any action in the past few years. Although the building has gotten a facelift over the years, it still looks relatively similar to what it did back in the early Bay Colony days here. When we get up to the crossing, we're going to take a look back in time and see how it used to look. We now find ourselves on the final approach to the Hillside Ave grade crossing. On the other side of the crossing is Needham Heights Station. Now switching back to our regular ground view, we get another angle look at this crossing, as well as the station and that former Carter Shoe Factory I talked about earlier. Now that we've had a quick look around, it's time for a quick look back in time. Here we see 1061 once again as it departs Needham Heights Station on its way to Medfield Junction. Although Needham Heights does look relatively complete at this time, the crossing protection is not yet installed, so so the member of the crew is going to have to step down from the engine to flag the crossing. In the background we once again see that Carter's building. The layout is pretty much relatively the same as today, but the building has definitely received a facelift since then. With the trains now in the clear, we find ourselves here at CP Heights. Unlike the previous signals we just looked at, CP Heights is not an automatic signal. It is part of the CTC system, and is dispatcher controlled. Before we head deeper into the station area, we're going to take a look at the switch here. Despite the fact that it looks like there's a lot going on here, this is a manually operated switch. There's also an electromagnetic lock tied in with the CTC system, so you need dispatcher approval to open the switch. Now after looking at that, it's time to continue back on our way. The bridge in the background we're now coming up to is the Honeywell Street overpass. Needham Heights here is the last station on the MBTA Needham line. Looking up at the bridge, we see 13.74. This is a mile marker indicating how far we are from South Station via rail. We now find ourselves arriving here at Control Point Land. CP Land is the western extent of the MBTA Needham line, and is where the signal territory ends. It's from this point that all Bay Colony trains coming from Newton back towards Medfield Junction would have to stop and wait for permission from the dispatcher to proceed through the signal territory in Needham. It's from here we're going to flip around 180 degrees and take our last look back in time for this episode. Here we see a Bay Colony train heading towards Newton. They have just left Needham Heights Station. One thing to note here is the concrete ties. When the line was rebuilt, the entire line was redone with concrete ties, but they quickly failed and were replaced with wood just a few years later. One other thing you may have noticed is that signal we just passed. The Y pattern signal was taken down in 2025 and replaced with a dwarf signal. Although it's been about 20 years since the last train passed Control Point Land, the area still sees the occasional high rail truck or on-track piece of equipment, and for this reason Keolis does maintain the right-of-way until the next grade crossing at Webster Street. Here we see an example of one of these rare moves, as I saw in early fall 2025. Now as we wrap up today's episode, we're going to take a look in the other direction at that dwarf signal. I hope you enjoyed our little adventure here in Needham today on Home Rails. We'll be back very soon for our next adventure, as we continue on our way to Newton and beyond. If you haven't done so already, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and make sure you hit that bell icon so you don't miss our next adventure. As always, thanks for watching. I'm your host Steve Hurley, and I'll catch you in the next one.